Welcome back to Spartan Up, the podcast. We have Root Canal Joe on my left. We have Sepher the Seed Huntress. We have Colonel the Tim of Nye. And we have Johnny the Doctor of Weight. And Marion, as always, behind the camera. This week, we are with Ian Adamson, who is working to make Spartan an Olympic sport. And Johnny, what, seven-time
world champion, incredible guy, breadth of experience. I believe he was the race director for Joe's first adventure race.
He was the race director for the first race we ever did.
I'd love to see that.
Sorry, my lips are
He's
not
like
working.
drooling.
We actually lost someone in that race, year 2000, but we'll wait until we come back.
I hope they found them eventually.
Tell that story.
Well, I'll let you know if we found them.
Welcome back to Spartan Up Podcast. We are here at the Olympic Village in Squaw Valley, Lake Tahoe, California. Incredible venue. The coolest part for me is I'm actually speaking to an Olympian and somebody who's been very involved with the Olympic movement, Ian Adamson.
Good morning. Nice to meet you all. Thank you. And I'm not an Olympian.
I thought you were.
Absolutely not. No. X Games, I have some X Games medals.
Yep.
Gold, silver, bronze, 7 world championships, and 3 age group world championships. So after retirement, I managed to jump back in and play.
So I'm very glad I made that mistake because that is cool to hear all that. That's fantastic. Yeah, really, really cool. Now that said, I know that people who are familiar with you through the Spartan world know that you actually have been involved in the movement towards Olympicizing obstacle racing.
So I have. Joe and I go back a long way to the 90s, actually, and I directed his first race in 2001. He was playing at that point with all sorts of things.
Yep.
But he is an excellent mudslinger, and he's got very sticky mud. So one of his ideas was he said, we really need to take this to the Olympics. And I think it was 2012, 2013, and said, hey, Ian, you're the guy, we should do this. And I looked at him and I went, Joe, I know you're crazy, but this is kind of out there. Yeah. Subsequently, I spent a year looking at it and reconnecting to my former teammates and people I'd worked with in Olympic sport, because I actually tried a lot of Olympic sport. Mm-hmm. I was a dismal failure, by the way. I could make national teams, I could make worlds, but I could never make the Olympics.
Yeah. So, and what sports were these? What sports did you compete in?
So my first sport was cycling. Yep. 1973, my dad was a cyclist, and I started road cycling. Got to national level, but road cycling is difficult. Mm-hmm. More accurately, I wasn't that good.
Sure.
Then I went into sailing.
Yep.
And I still sail. I love sailing. Absolutely love sailing. But again, the competition is fierce, and I'm just not that good. Mm-hmm. So failed at that. And then, no, I shouldn't say that. Didn't make it to the top level.
Yeah, I was going to say it's all relative, right?
It's relative.
I think to the average person, you're going to be very good at these things, but like you're comparing yourself to the highest level of all.
Yeah, I mean, we could medal at World Cups and get to World Championships and medal at World Championships. Mm-hmm. Same with canoe and kayak. Represented Australia and the US in canoe and got to the World Championships, got a bronze, got a couple of bronzes, but again, not good enough. And it's a big difference being on a team or being an individual, because the absolute best in a sport are the individual athletes who win as a solo athlete. I've never been able to do that. I've always won as a team or with a team, as part of a team. So I cannot take credit for success other than, I guess, 30 years of consistency. That would be my success.
And that's actually something that I want to ask you about, because we talked to a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, and a huge theme in our podcast is grit, and how do you keep going, and how do you know when to keep going versus turning around and things like that. And if you are the absolute best in the world, of course you're going to keep going. But you won't have that absolute best without a whole bunch of almost as goods. So what drove you all those years when you were you weren't quite at the pinnacle, but you were still succeeding pretty greatly by my standards? What was that kept driving you? What was that kept you moving forward?
I absolutely love what I did. Still do. I sort of miss what I was doing, although I kind of aged out. Won my 7th World Championship at 43 before going to age group stuff.
And that was in?
That was 2006.
Sorry, in which sport though?
That was adventure racing. So I had most of the success in adventure racing.
Yeah.
Adventure racing was where Joe Descent and I met.
Yeah.
And it was the precursor of obstacle. I mean, it really was obstacle racing.
Of course, sure. And describe for people, I know what adventure racing is, but I'll let you describe it to the listeners and the viewers who may not know. So it's obviously a hybrid of sports. So tell me about your experience with it.
It is. So adventure racing it's a long distance, ultra distance multi-sport. Typically, it can all sorts of distances and events, but anything non-motorized, typically with navigation involved, so map and compass. Inevitably, not always, but overwhelmingly as teams, co-ed, so men and women, configurations of 3, 4, or 5, most commonly 3 or 4. And that was every time you add a person, you add the statistical probability that you're going to fail.
Sure.
Which makes it interesting, and the dynamics become like an allegory for life, because you're doing everything that you do with your family or your business or all that kind of stuff. And it's a lot like people do out here in Spartan races, is they are working together.
Yep.
They're forming community. They're communicating. They're doing all the things that we do in life. It's a little bit amplified because you're in a fairly tough environment. And that's what we did.
I know that at the Spartan Race World Championships this year, they've introduced a team element for the international with teams of 3 from around the world. I think there's 20-some countries involved. And again, the same thing, right? Because you may be able to finish as an individual, but can you do it as a team? It's a really neat dynamic.
It is an interesting dynamic. I think it creates a lot of interest for people watching because you're never quite sure. It's not the fastest, strongest. A lot of people would say in adventure racing, now we went very long. We would go, the longest races were 700 miles, so we kind of went long. And the obstacles were mountain ranges and
Sure.
Oceans.
Yeah.
So different obstacles, but still obstacles. The thing that you'll see in a good team is they go considerably faster than their slowest athlete.
Amazing.
And most people don't appreciate that because they will often say and self-limit themselves by saying, "Oh, we're only as strong as our weakest team member." Well, if that's your goal, you're probably going to achieve it. But the reality was, our goal as a team was we would always aim to go faster than the slowest, actually faster than the fastest athlete.
By supporting one another's weaknesses and moving forward, yeah.
That's right. And you can appreciate, if you look at a cycling pace line, the cycling pace line in road cycling goes faster than the fastest individual.
Sure.
So that's the goal.
Okay,
and you
cool.
can achieve it, interestingly. It's possible.
And that's neat to turn that paradigm on its head. You're not just as strong as your weakest link. You can make each other stronger.
That's right. I mean, there's all sorts, there's many things have been said about this over the years in terms of synergy and whatever, but it's the human condition. It's all about humans and how we interact and what we do, what we can do together powerfully.
So another thing that I find interesting, so you talked about sailing and some of these traditional age-old sports, but you've also been involved in cutting-edge, adventure racing at its infancy, and you talked about the X Games as well. And so what is it that's driven you towards constantly moving forward instead of just settling into that? A lot of people do. I'm a Canadian, right? And a lot of Canadians, they're good at hockey and they'll play hockey no matter how bad they get at it. That's what they're going to do the rest of their life. Or the golfer who only golfs. So you've constantly sought out new things. I find that fascinating. What drives that?
Well, I'm like your Canadian hockey players. I was just so bad at everything. I would just keep failing and then try something else. That's kind of how it worked. Actually, what would
fail forward?
Fail forward. Yeah. Well, actually, what happened with me is that. Individual sports, which I still absolutely love, I could never really excel. Not to the top level. Like you said, it's contextual, but the reality was in my mind, I would fail at something, and then I'd move on to something else and try that. And then I'd go, well, I'm not the best swimmer, the best cyclist, or the best runner, or the best whatever, so I'll try triathlon. So I'd do triathlon, and I'd go, okay, make world championships or something, but be pretty average at that level. And there I'm going, well, I'll add another sport.
Sure.
So I just keep adding stuff and going longer, and eventually there's no one left. That's it. Simple.
War of attrition.
Exactly.
That's great. Something interesting that you touched on there that I want to come back to actually in a minute. I know that we need to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you about the need to be exceptional.
Okay, sounds great.
Hey, Spartans. We're sitting here in Boston in a beautiful treehouse in the financial district. We're shooting podcast episodes, and this is actually we just had a conversation about Four Sigmatic. As you probably know, they've been a sponsor of the podcast for a little while, and we're talking about how we really are kind of a perfect representative sample. I'm a coffee drinker, but I don't know a whole lot about mushrooms. Sephra, you are a mushroom expert.
I'm not an expert, but
enthusiast
of the three of us.
But it falls into your world of
purview.
It's into your purview, exactly. And Tim is a complete neophyte who knows nothing about mushrooms, nothing about coffee.
He says,
I am as dumb as they come.
how do you say that C word? What'd you call it?
The cacao.
Oh, he's got it.
Now he's learned how to
I
say
liked cacao better.
But I've learned, right?
But that's
the whole
interesting
idea.
because I was mentioning coffee, but they do make cacao drinks as well.
Yeah.
And some are elixirs. And Tim, you were asking, what the difference is. Like for example, the coffee, the mushroom coffee is coffee, like a traditional coffee with mushroom added, and we're talking about the medicinal benefits of that. So, Sephra, why would you add lion's mane and chaga to coffee?
Well, okay, there's a couple different things. Like when they made kids gummies into like gummy bears,
Yep.
so you could like sneak in nutrition. I think a lot of people are drinking coffee anyway, and when you can get delicious medicinal stuff in it, then people are going to get that ingested into their bodies. And you have to remember, coffee does have its medicinal properties as well, but it's not native to North America. So you have to think like, what were people drinking in the mornings when they were wandering and foraging through these lands, right? And then a lot of that's like, hey, chaga makes a nice dark brown drink, and you want to know what else? It's also like good and anti-cancerous, antibacterial, blah, blah, all these different things. But people didn't even necessarily need to know all those health benefits because it's just, they knew it was good for you. They knew it made you feel good, and it was in your forest.
So the mushroom is added to the coffee.
Yeah.
So it's mixed in. So you have all the benefits that you would have from the coffee, plus the additional benefits of the mushroom.
So that's the mushroom coffee. But then there's also the chaga elixir, for example, which is simply
Chaga.
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 We have to work.
Right.
We haven't even got to
I
cordyceps
love my
yet.
podcasters. We'll make a mycologist out of you yet,
You will
Colonel.
be a mycologist yet?
I look forward to the transition.
Well, hey, if you want to become more of a mycologist yourself, or even just find out more about Four Sigmatic drinks, go to foursigmatics.com,
Nailed it.
foursigmatics.com/Spartan.
Yep.
And if you use Spartan as the code when you order, you'll get 15% off all the products.
Chaga chaga.
Hey, Spartans, we're going to get right back to the interview, but I wanted to talk to Tom Hennel again this week. And he and his team have been doing some research into food and fats and diet.
Yeah, Marion, we got a great story this week. Is eating fat bad for you or good for you?
That's the ultimate question.
So luckily, I have Anne LaRue on staff here, and Anne is not only a registered and licensed dietitian, she's a triple threat. She's also a certified SGX coach, and she was a former top elite Spartan racer. And kind of breaks this down for us. What's good fat? What's bad fat? And how do we make these decisions?
What is good fat and bad fat?
In terms of good fat, if you want to call it that, the mono and the polyunsaturated fats, these are the fats you find in like nuts and fish and oils and avocados. And what she does is she gives some real great advice about learning to read labels and looking at, well, what's the percentage of daily value from fat? And it should always be less than 5% or less, making sure that the majority of those fats are coming from healthy fats and not the trans fats or saturated fats. Looking closer at the ingredients, that if it says hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated, that's really just a hidden way of saying trans fat.
Did she talk about the trend of fueling with fats and ketosis and all of that?
She doesn't get into that detail, but she reminds us that, research is always changing. Kind of the takeaway is focus on the positive. For example, an egg is a good example that, there is fat and cholesterol in eggs, but there's also vitamin D and other value to it.
And fats might not be just the absolute enemy that we always thought they were. It's more complicated than that.
It's always more complicated. And there are certain fats that, our body needs. It helps us digest other foods. It helps keeps things lubricated. It helps things moving.
So where can people read the entire article?
Go to life.spartan.com and then under our nutrition category.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Marion.
So you talked about this need to excel, and you'd get to a level and you realize you weren't the very best, and so you did something else. And it's funny, I found that in my life years ago where I was very good at average things, and I was very average at exceptional things. And it's frustrating when you compare yourself to the very best, but you're doing exceptional things, and they need to be exceptional at exceptional things. And I think some people get beaten down by that, and you found a way to have that just keep moving you forward. You never got frustrated. You joke about, I don't say joke, you're very humble. You say, I wasn't very good. You were very good, but I know what you mean, that you never got to that level you wanted to be. But you never stopped. You never said sports aren't for me, or I'm a failure. You always found a way to keep moving forward. So when you have this drive to be exceptional at exceptional things, how did you harness all that?
That's an interesting question. No one's ever actually asked that. How do you harness it? Thank you. Is a good. I got to think about it for a while. Harnessing stuff for me, I think there's an internal drive which we all have as humans. Mm-hmm. We have innate survival skills, and I think when you boil it all down, we are accessing things that allow us as humans to survive. And what I mean by survive, it's not survive day to day, make a paycheck. It's if civilization evaporated and we're left out in the woods, what would we do? Well, everyone, the overwhelming majority of humans would find a way to survive, and they'd probably do it with other humans, because we're a social species. So what you end up doing in these things, like out here on these race courses, is that that innate human element kicks in, and you start accessing that survival piece. Now, you kind of framed it as being exceptional, but I think what it is, it's being human. And I've always felt that doing this kind of extreme level of sport is accessing our innate abilities. It's not something extraordinary at all. I think we've lost the ability to access what's actually natural to us.
Amazing, yeah. And I look at societally right now, there's such a push where we're seeing these things. And I watch Danny McCaskill, the trials biker, and I'm just so proud to be human. Like, he makes me better by what he can do. And we're seeing that, through the extreme sports, that all these things that we thought were limits aren't even close to limits. And it's really, really cool to watch that. So I want to ask you another question that is, you talked about how this is part of life, and we talk about sports. And so I want to ask, what lessons did you take from earlier in life that you applied to sports? So where did you learn those things that allowed you to apply it to sport and excel at sport? But also, what have you taken out of sport, and what can our listeners and viewers take out of sport to apply to life? So these things that you've learned in your sporting career that apply to everywhere in your life.
Well, it's a bi-directional thing. There's not one or the other. It's actually, if people pay attention, you can kind of walk them together in lockstep, because what we do as humans, whether it's in family life, professional, business life, or just social interaction, they're really all the same things that we do out on a race course. It's just on a race course, it's condensed into a small period of time and amplified. And consequently, you feel it. It's kind of raw. You hear this constantly. I'm sure on the podcasts, you're getting a lot of people saying, I did my first race, and this is what I felt and experienced. All they're doing is they're experiencing the human set of thoughts and emotions and spirit, if you want, but in a very small time span, and amplified to the extent where it becomes very apparent to them. It's very front and center to them. That's always there. They're just not accessing it. So when you think about how does it apply back to normal life, they're all the same things. It's communication and teamwork and synergy and conflict, raw emotions, not raw emotions. Can you control them? Do you want to control them? Those are the things that we experience with our loved ones in our business life. And out here, they are a lot more amplified and a lot raw.
Yeah, the concentration of it in a 3 to 5 hour beast, for example, where somebody gets to go through the joy of crossing the start line, the frustration, the anger at the race director. I've been the brunt of that before. I can't do this, to I did do this, to the crying at the finish line in pure joy and then celebration. Pretty amazing how in life we're taught to take the simple down the middle route and avoid conflict and avoid all this. We've created an environment where they're inevitable.
That's right. Yeah, it's one thing we used to say in adventure racing was in a 1 week race, which is kind of a common race, in a 1 week race, and they're non-stop, so you get pretty beat down for some people. It was essentially compressing a year of experience into a week.
Yeah.
But when you compress it, like if you push a spring together, everything gets amplified. The highs are higher, the lows are lower, and you start to realize things about yourself. And it happens on these courses, whether it's 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, a beast, a super, ultra beast. It's all the same things. It just gets progressively more poignant as you move further into the desperate levels of stress and suffering that you get physically, at least, in these races. And it's beyond physical, because for most people, when you start this, it's a very physical thing. But as you get more adept at it, it becomes more of an emotional thing. And eventually, for a very few people, if they keep at it, it becomes somewhat spiritual.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
And you will, well, that's good. You know that. So, and you can't teach someone that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have them read a book and experience that. You can't have them watch a seminar or a video, or they might get motivated.
Yeah.
But they don't feel it until they're actually there suffering.
And it's not a coincidence that our common link is Joe. And, this world of how do you push it further, and, through the extreme racing you've done with him and that I've done with him, it really is, it taps into that spiritual level. It takes it to a whole other level. I want to ask you one more question. That's this. So with all your experience and all these things you've learned, what are you doing with it now? So tell me about your life right now and what's next for you.
I've been extremely fortunate in my athletic and business careers, I guess. And at this point, I have the opportunity to give back. Mm-hmm. Racing as a professional is quite a selfish thing at one level, because you get given things and paid to do stuff that you love and then take money from it. Mm-hmm. To me, it's really about furthering humankind. I mean, I really mean that, not in a grandiose way, but the fact that we have the opportunity to help people get off the couch and be healthier, mm-hmm. and have better weight maintenance and eat better foods. And that's through inspiration. It's difficult to beat that into someone with a stick,
Yeah.
it's really easy to lead them. Now, whether they drink or not is another question, but we have the ability now to do that. So what I've done originally with Joe's idea actually is to codify the sport of obstacle racing and obstacle course racing. And this really runs the gamut from like American Ninja Warrior style shows all the way through to old school adventure racing and everything in between. Now, the sweet spot, the meat is Spartan Race and the other brands around this side. So the sport is, it's non-profit, federative, member-based. It's the national federations, which are member-based, which is the people who race. So we're a democratic system, and our goal is to get recognition as an international federation, which is actually by the International Olympic Committee.
Yep.
And then all things being equal, and if we do a good job and we keep moving forward effectively, we can hopefully get a medal event at the Olympics at some point in the future, which gives a huge exposure to the general population of humans. Now, that's really the big nugget, because they're in front of they're getting seen by 5 billion people.
Yep.
There's very few things get seen by 5 billion people. Actually, there's nothing else gets seen by 5 billion people. So if you get on that platform and you can inspire people, motivate people, get them enthused and get them off the couch, if we can do that, we've done our job.
And I'd say spending a bit of time with you makes it start to feel inevitable. Whereas people thought it sounded ridiculous. Honestly, the way you describe it, I can't see anything else happening. So,
I believe it. Now, belief and reality are different things. And there are a lot of naysayers. It's a very difficult thing to do. Most sports don't make it. A lot of sports can get recognized. It takes a lot of time. Can be decades, and there can be centuries where they're not, and they can come back in.
Snowboarding, skateboarding, surfing, they're all getting in there.
Rugby was in, and the 100 years and was out, and 100 years later came back in again. So this is the Olympics. So for the Olympic level, it's most people would see it as an insurmountable Everest type deal. I don't. I see it as an incredible opportunity.
I'm with you. Thanks, Ian. Appreciate
You're
that
very welcome.
very much.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely guy. Great guy. Joe, what happened to that person 18 years later?
18 years. Yeah. No. So year 2000, first race we ever put on. I had this vision for
that race. Oh, in the Caribbean.
In the Caribbean,
I heard
British
that.
Virgin Islands. Ian's the only guy that could handle a race of that magnitude. It's 350 miles long. It's covering massive territory. There are storms rolling in.
Dell was there.
Unbeknownst to me, we lose a guy. I don't find out the guy is lost until 8 days later. And the reason I don't find out when I investigate is he was setting the ropes course, cut his leg, and the rest of the team on the ropes course said, look, you're of no use to us now. Go get stitches on the island. We'll see you at the end of the race, 8 days from now. Unbeknownst to them, he went out in his dinghy, went to start his engine, never started. Just started screaming.
Cast away
into the fog. Race goes on, all kinds of stuff. I mean, we could talk for days about that race, but Ian was the race director. He doesn't know that obviously the guy's gone. Fast forward, finish line, they're breaking champagne against boats. Everything was a tremendous success. The TV cameras are there.
Where's that guy?
Somebody comes over to me and says, we haven't seen, John.
Since he got his leg.
I said, what do you mean you haven't seen him? Well, we haven't seen him since 8 days ago. Well, how the f*** are you just telling me that now? Anyway, my dad's there. My dad goes, listen, British Virgin Islands, negligence could be criminal. You might be
Yeah.
right?
They're actually super strict there. No,
So
I've worked down
you
there.
better go. We got to go get the Coast Guard. Your father-in-law, my wife Courtney's dad, is a ex fixed wing and rotary helicopter pilot.
And really handsome.
So we rent Richard Branson's helicopter. I don't know if anybody knows the story. Richard's probably going to kill me for this. And Coast Guard heads out. They map out everything, and they figure out, all right, if he's gone, and last saw here, a storm's rolled in, currents, wind, he might be that way. We jump in Branson's helicopter, and Branson's pilot, 5 feet off the ground, passes out. I'm in the back of the helicopter, and my father-in-law takes over.
Oh, my God, it's amazing.
Thank God.
Passed out drunk or passed out?
Drunk. Had been drinking
Welcome
all night.
to the Caribbean.
Had been drinking all night. So the thing is, it's a French helicopter. My father-in-law was not used to it, so the controls are backwards. So we do about 2 minutes of craziness. Finally, my father-in-law gets control, and we go look. Well, the Coast Guard finds him before we do.
So they found him adrift.
He drifted 150 miles to Little Tobago, uninhabited.
Oh, my God, that's so far.
Lived on the island.
Coconut.
Eating crabs and drifting bottles of water from the race that had drifted also to the island, which means we should stop using plastic bottles. Yeah. Although in that case, it saved his life. Saved his life.
There you go.
I thought I was dead. I said, this guy is going to sue. This is going to be all kinds of problems. Coast Guard brings him in, lands him, and he's like, I am starving. Can we go grab a dinner?
That's it.
That was it. He was awesome.
Vision Quest.
Sports Illustrated did a little story. Ian Adamson was the race director for all that. We stayed friends forever. So when the goal was, how do we get this thing in the Olympics?
Right. You got to get from that start to where we are now.
To where we are now? Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, so then fast forward and lots of trials and tribulations and false starts. But now we're obviously a lot bigger, 1 million participants a year, 42 countries.
Keep track of people on the course better.
We keep track of people. And by the way, 1 million participants now. That race had 100 participants.
Yeah.
That first race, right? So pretty good. We have not lost a person yet. 5 million people in.
Knock on wood for that.
True story.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop talking now because my root canal is hurting. So
well, and I was really lucky to be able to do that interview. I'd met Ian a few times through you, but to sit down and talk with him like that was what an interesting, thoughtful guy. And I love that I would pose questions that he'd answer differently than almost anyone else would, probably from his experience, but also just his way of being. And
he's a little bit like you.
Well,
he's very grounded.
Bald. No, thank you, Joel. I'll take that as a huge compliment, actually, because I really admire Ian. And one of the things that he said that we were discussing earlier today, actually, was the idea about that we all have these innate survival skills. Like, obviously, we're here because our ancestors are the ones who survived, and yet we don't really have any opportunity to tap into those. And he said that's what really drew him to all these adventure sports and extreme sports, is the idea that here's an opportunity to actually go out and really tap into all this unused capacity that we all have. And, he's done it at a pretty high level for a long time.
You know, I've heard a great quote. You'll like this. Dr. Nye. Sorry, that's the root canal speaking. We want to help people punch above their weight class.
Yeah, right.
I love that sentence, right?
Right.
That's what we're doing.
Right. Well, and that's the whole
intellectual weight class.
Yeah,
but
they achieve more than you think you can achieve, right? Yeah. And it's the same thing he was talking about, that running faster than your slowest guy, right?
That was a really cool thing.
Most people think that if you're in a group, you bring the group down to the lowest common denominator, right? And he is saying, no, push it, right? Which made me think back to one of your earlier interviews with General McChrystal, who said essentially the same thing. You can drop a guy into an elite unit, and that guy will become, well, either that or he leaves. But, I mean, you can push people further and faster when they're in a group than they can go by themselves sometimes, right? You've got the peer pressure. Yep. You've got the expectations, and then there's just something,
and also
the energy of a group pushing you.
And also the supporting. And it's funny, Sepher, I think about you with, you'll tie this into the natural world, but the idea that, if you take this person, their weakness is supported by that other person's strength. So you've got somebody who's good at walls and somebody who's good at ropes and somebody who's good at navigating, somebody who's good at paddling. So you're not as slow as your slowest paddler because they're being lifted up by the fastest paddlers. And so, Sepher, I know you're dying to tie this into nature.
I think of the Rudyard Kipling quote, which is the strength of the wolf is the pack, and the pack
strength of the pack is the wolf.
I just spoke at NC State the other day.
Yeah.
I got the nice coin, said exactly.
Kipling's
There's no relevance
awesome
to this at all, but I came up with a great quote this morning.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it, root canal Joe.
Does that have anything to do with the dentist?
But let's hear it.
No, like everybody talks about the early bird gets the worm, and I was up at like 5 a.m. because my tooth was killing me, and I thought, you know what? The fit worm strangles the fucking bird.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious.
Anyway, I don't know if that fits.
No,
I can see it in a coffee cup tomorrow.
Yeah, the bird's
at the Spartan store.
No, there's an importance to being up at sunrise. All the great elders, all the great leaders, all the great everyone, they're up at sunrise. There's a magical time there that.
But the second most gets the cheese.
Thank you, Canadian humor. I don't get it. I don't get it.
I want to bring this back here, just kind of rooted here one more time. So I've never met Ian before, and I knew that you knew him. But about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now, I'm trying to remember. My son was injured, and I asked you. I think it was around 2 years ago, right? A year and a half, whatever. It'll be 2 years. 2 years this summer, I think, coming up summer. So But severe heat stroke, core temperature off the charts, unconscious for a long time, that kind of stuff. They brought him around. They said, we thought...
And he was 90% into his way of becoming...
Right. We thought he was going to die, and if he survived, we thought he'd probably be brain dead.
Ryan?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I don't go into all personal stories. So anyway, but I came to Joe and said, because once he was kind of on the mend, he wanted to continue his training, his special forces training. And they were saying, no, you can't. You've been too severely injured here. And so I was asking Joe what he thought, and he put me in touch with Ian, who said, hey, there's these great doctors in Israel that are doing some stuff and everything. So anyway, the guy didn't know me from Adamson, and I didn't know him, but we both knew you. Anyway, he
helped you out.
He helped us. And, my son's now a fully qualified Green Beret, running around the world doing what he wants to do.
Awesome.
So
I forgot about that story.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, if you want to be saved, if you want to be the second mouse, if you want to be that worm that chokes the bird.
All this wisdom and more, you're going to go to Spartan.com/podcast. You're going to check us out on iTunes, on YouTube. You're going to subscribe so you can get it every week. Ian's a great guest. We have lots more to come. Spartan Up Podcast.
Thank you for watching another epic story of success. If you like our message, please share Spartan Up with your friends and subscribe on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you catch our show, maybe in the woods. Spartan Up is brought to you by Spartan Race. To find a race near you, visit Spartan.com.